In today's episode of Today in World War II, April 7th, the Germans launched their invasion of Norway. The U.S. establishes a base in Bermuda as a result of the Lend-Lease agreement. The British military governor and driving force of Operation Compass in Libya are captured by the Germans. On Bataan, the Japanese break through two American and Filipino defense lines. Uh, Montgomery briefs his generals and says he's going to take Caen on day one. The super battleship Yamato is sunk by the United States fleet, and the history of Yamato ends ignominiously. Let's get started. All right, so this is a very important day in the war. Operation Übung, which is the German name for the invasion of Norway, launches today. And I want to focus right now on the naval part of it because this was really fascinating for me because, as I said in a previous episode, a recent episode, you know, on paper, the Royal Navy should have just cleaned their clocks and could have stopped this invasion right away. But there's a lot of things that went wrong for the Brits and went wrong. And some things went wrong for the Germans as well, but enough things went right for them that they were able to eventually, win in Norway. So the German naval force, they separated themselves into 10 groups. They had a World War I battleship, the Schleswig-Holstein. They had three heavy cruisers. I think it was Köln, Königsberg, and Karlsruhe, and they had some light cruisers as well. I mean, Blücher and Lützow and Hipper were there. A lot of about 20 destroyers, motor torpedo boats, the whole nine yards. Now Dönitz, he positioned about 31 submarines to shield this invasion force from the British. But much like what happened with the American submarines in the Pacific, the first couple years of the war against the Japanese, they were having torpedo problems, and actually they pooped the bed as far as this thing goes. I think they only sank six Allied ships, but they lost four submarines themselves. This was launched, pre-dawn. By about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the British RAF had spotted some of the invasion forces. But here's the problem. They had an airstrike against them, but they weren't very successful. I mean, the Brits were not good at this point of the war attacking shipping. They didn't have Stuka dive bombers like the Luftwaffe did, which were very effective against shipping. But the problem was at the top. The British Admiralty received notifications that there was a major German naval movement going on, but they assumed, and you know what happens when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. Well, the British Admiralty made a mess out of things because they incorrectly assumed that they were launching a major attack into the Atlantic Ocean. So they sent the home fleet out, but they were preparing for battle on the open seas. They were not ready for in coastal battles. They didn't send them to Norway, let's put it that way, okay? And then to compound their blunders, they kept their submarines patrolling the European coast for German activity rather than going out to Norway. So all of these so is the first part for the very crucial key part of this German invasion of Norway. They were fighting with both almost pretty much both hands tied behind their back, which gave the Germans time. Now, listen, as this Battle of Norway continues, you're going to see that the Royal Navy is going to kick back and start doing some heavy damage to the Germans. But by the time that happens, the Germans were already landed, and with the Luftwaffe capturing airfields, we know how this is going to go. Okay. So on April 7th, 1941, the U.S. Navy base that began operations in Bermuda. Bermuda is a British colony, British territory, but as part of the Lend-Lease agreement between FDR and Churchill, the Brits had to give up or allow a lease of 99 years for a number of their bases, including Iceland and Bermuda and down in the Caribbean and so on and so forth, because rather than it was a barter agreement, right? We got 99-year leases for these bases. In exchange, they got more weapons and more supplies and munitions and so forth for to keep their war machine going. So it's a very good deal for the U.S. And the Brits got what they wanted, so it was great. Instead of draining their treasury by having them buy arms, this was by far the best way to do it. So Roosevelt was a genius when it came to this. I'm glad that he did that. Oh, that we had done the same thing for Ukraine, but don't get me started. All right, on April 7th, 1941, uh, Lieutenant General Richard O'Connor, who was the driving force leading Operation Compass, which kicked the Italians out of Egypt and and drove them all the way, through the Cyrenaica Peninsula down to El Halhila, which is where they were at when Rommel came into the picture and started his offensive just a few days ago in this chronicle. Well, there was a mortar column. It was General O'Connor and the British military governor Cyrenaica. They were together and they got lost. Well, they got captured by the Germans. And so they were in the bag the rest of the war. So that was a blow because he was a very effective general. I mean, he was very aggressive and he was very good at flanking the Italians. Now, of course, flanking the Italians in North Africa is not the same thing as flanking Rommel, but in this type of warfare where it's back and forth and the one side's continually flanking the other, losing someone who knows how to flank and is aggressive, that's tough. I'm not putting him in the same class as Patton, but it's kind of similar in a sense. You want those kinds of generals and on your side and fighting and not in a POW camp. On April 7th, 1942, on Bataan in the Philippine Islands, the Japanese assaulted troops held by U.S. and Filipino troops on the Second Corps. They were forced to fall back two lines. They had a secondary defensive line on the San Vicente River, and then they were driven back the Mamala River, and they were hoping to stop the Japanese there, but they weren't. They had to continue to go back to the Alangan River. They're running out of rivers. Okay, they're running out of time. They're already on quarter rations. They're starving, and they don't have the munitions. The supplies practically non-existent. So they're going to be, they're going to be forced to surrender very soon, and their suffering until the surrender is nothing compared to what's going to happen to them after. There's just some foreshadowing there. And on April 7th, 1944, General Montgomery briefs his generals regarding the invasion, the D-Day invasion of France. And he famously predicts that he's going to take Caen on the first day of the invasion. And he was right if you use a calendar where one day means almost 2 months. So I guess in a sense he could have been right on that. Montgomery, let's put it this way, he wasn't lacking in confidence. Unfortunately, his mouth and his predictions of writing checks that he could not cash when it actually came to doing the things that he was predicting he could do. So we have how long it took him to take Caen in Normandy, and we're going to get into this, coming up in the summer after once we hit June and July and August. But also think about Market Garden. He was convinced that he could capture like what, 7 bridges in territory that was absolutely unsuited for fast armor strikes. But I tell you what, he sure was confident, and he did excellent work in the South in North Africa. All powered up Montgomery when it comes to that, but he did not do his best in after the invasion of Normandy and into Germany. I mean, yes, what can you say? But my gosh, what he swung and missed twice, with Caen and Market Garden. We'll get into Market Garden later, of course. And finally, on April 7th, 1945, on a last gasp effort, the Japanese Navy sent their super battleship Yamato to Okinawa with the mission of shelling and destroying as many ships as they could, and then grounding itself on the island of Okinawa, and then being used as a shore battery with its 18-inch guns. Well, it was a foolhardy approach. This is yet another example of the Japanese who would just throw away their assets on some symbolic banzai charge, and this is what the equivalent was. Well, you had you had the American Third Fleet there, and with the fast carriers, the Essex class carriers, and so on and so forth, and they initially Halsey wanted to send his battleships to take him out, but then he was convinced to have the air crew, the airstrikes against it and shoot, have their airstrikes sink the Yamato, which they did. And I tell you what, the Yamato was a very amazingly protected armored battleship, and it took a lot of torpedoes and bombs to sink it. But you know what? They had an almost unlimited supply of torpedoes, and there was no anti-aircraft to speak of to prevent them from the planes from doing that, and they did. And of course, the Yamato went down, and it was very ignominious defeat end for the Yamato, and it really only had one surface battle, which was the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and even then it was betrayed by the Admiral Kurita, who never used it effectively, and we're going to get into that later in the fall when that happens. But that's what happened on April 7, 1940 through 45, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you.